Welcome to the Purpose for Life podcast. I'm your host, Suzanne Roberts, author of It's Deeper Than That and founder of The Great Reconnection, Soul-Led Living and Soul-Led Leadership. I'm so excited to have here with us today James Hardy. Do you go by James or Jim? Do you
James.
Care? James. Love the name James. I'm so excited to have you here today and for our listeners to hear the evolution of your life and where you've come to at this point in your life. So can we start there and talk about what are you doing for seminary school, and then we'll talk about how you got there.
I'm currently halfway through a Master of Divinity program at Star King School for the Ministry. Star King's based out in Berkeley, California, but they started a really robust and awesome online program during COVID and kept it going. And so I'm on the online program with them. They're Unitarian Universalist by tradition, but now they cater to any and all faith traditions. I really felt an urge to ministry, not really knowing, and still as we sit here today and chat, I'm not really 100% sure where I'm being led, but I know that I'm supposed to be in some type of ministry, whether ordained or otherwise. And so Star King has been excellent at helping me think through both an interfaith lens, which is really important to me. I identify spiritually as Christian plus. So,
what does Christian plus mean?
So I grew up in the Roman Catholic tradition. Both my parents were devout Roman Catholics. My dad even spent 8 years in seminary thinking that he was going to become a Catholic priest before leaving.
Wow.
My mom had a degree in theology from Ohio Dominican when she went there before becoming a teacher, and obviously they met as teachers. So growing up, I had a really strong faith tradition, and like many, I left the church in my late teens because I couldn't get with the hypocrisy of the institution, what I was hearing from the pulpit versus what I read in the Gospels. And so I spent 20 years essentially adrift, agnostic bordering on atheist, preferring the Stoics and Greek philosophy and political theorists and Western political thought over anything that would strike you as spiritual. And so when I came around to really wanting to rebuild a spiritual life, I started with the Abrahamic traditions because that's what I knew best. So Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. But I really avoided Christianity as much as possible because I really had not dealt with that trauma and how I felt about it. But through many years of reading and reflection, and then certainly in the almost 2 years now of being in seminary, I've processed a lot of that. And so I've come to reclaim being a son of the Christian church while recognizing that the Buddha means an incredible amount to me as Buddhism, particularly Mahayana Buddhism and the teachings of Thich Nhat Hanh and others have really, really helped me to deal and process with that Christian trauma. And because I'm in an interfaith program, I just adore and have mad respect for all traditions. My chaplaincy director is pagan. My classmates span the gamut of religious backgrounds. And even in my community, we have really strong Hindu and Buddhist traditions, as well as the Abrahamic faiths. And so for me, I say Christian plus because I think it's important to have a center, a place of a paradigm through which not only you can think through, but people can also interpret you and know how to approach you. I tried being all things, and it didn't really work out so well. So like having some sort of center or home, spiritual home, if you will, I think is really important. But I grab for all of it because I certainly don't think that Christianity has a monopoly on truth or on spirituality. It just is one window into divine reality.
I love that, one window into divine reality. Would you talk a little bit about what you call Christian trauma and how that showed up for you and how you helped yourself heal from that.
I grew up in a conservative parish. I'm using that both theologically and politically. So it was a pretty affluent parish, even though my parents were school teachers. It's just where we lived. And in the Catholic tradition, parish corresponds to geography quite a bit. And so the parish I grew up in really taught a type of theology, particularly Catholic way of thinking, that is heavy on social and personal ethics, but not in a way that is generative, positive, or helpful, in my opinion. So, for example, the 8 years I spent from first grade through eighth grade preparing for my confirmation, every Monday night going to catechism were spent talking about abortion, a lot of anti-gay rhetoric, talking about sin as endemic to humanity and to all creation. And so essentially you're a bad person until you are redeemed by either believing or because God says so. So I didn't get a positive view of creation, of my own humanity, of others. And I was getting a lot of conflicting social commentary versus what my parents were bringing me up with. So my parents were children of the 60s, 1950s and 60s. They were political liberals while also maintaining their devout Catholicism. And so what would happen a lot is I would come home really not liking what I heard about something. So, for example, if the lesson that Monday night was about how gays and lesbians are going to hell, I would say, well, what about Uncle Keith? Like, I don't understand. Uncle Keith and Uncle Harry, like, they can't be going to hell. It doesn't make any sense to me. And of course, my parents would say, they're not. That's ridiculous. But that leaves a cognitive dissonance
Right.
that if left unresolved can just lead to what it did, which is leaving faith altogether, just realizing or thinking it's all hypocrisy. It's all just political, social institutions that want to control people. And there's a lot of that. And you miss the beauty, the mysticism, the generative positivity that flows through every faith tradition to some degree that I've ever come across. So I did just that. Like I said, I left, and I just left it. I just convinced myself that I could live an ethical life without religion or spirituality, really.
Because what's the difference between spirituality and religion?
Well, first, religion is a Western term that if we were to go to, I hear a lot in the West, for example, folks say, well, Buddhism isn't a religion, it's a philosophy. I dare you to tell the Dalai Lama that. Like, it's much more than a philosophy for him and for those that practice. And so, yes, they may not be monotheistic or theistic in that same regard as other traditions, but there is a spirituality and a deepness there that all of us would say is religious. But religion is really a category that came up in the West to try and categorize and legitimize certain traditions that have been around for millennia, and conversely, to delegitimize others.
Right.
And so religion is really a academic category. Spirituality is something inherent to all of us, whether we practice a particular tradition or not. All of us, and you talk about this too, all of us are endowed with a spiritual nature that manifests itself in different ways. And so spirituality, how we practice, how we manifest that innate energy can look very different, and often does, even within the same tradition. And so I like to differentiate between that too, of like religion, which is really sort of the organized academic category of something, versus a spiritual life or spirituality, which is something that we all have and share to some degree.
When you got a calling or a longing or an itch about ministering, because it sounds like you are already ministering while I'm talking to you and listening to you. What happened?
Like many folks that I have met that are either in ministry or have become spiritual teachers or have just really come to embrace their spirituality. Fortunately or unfortunately, it's usually forged through adversity. So for me, I was doing quite well, or at least I thought, without a spiritual life till my early 30s. So I had gone over a decade, gotten married, saw two beautiful children come along, great friends, building a career in government and politics really, really well, academic pursuits going really well, getting my advanced degrees, and things were going great.
Even being the chief of staff for the mayor of Akron.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, I was well on my way to achieving any and all career goals that I had. And then a series of unfortunate events occurred that shattered that feeling of security, certainty, that I was, in fact, firing on all cylinders. And we all have that. We need to take a step back. Like, when things are really good, the cliche is true. When things are really good, you can believe in all kinds of things. It's when things are bad that you realize, you're forced to realize who you really are, what your values really are, who really cares about you, and who you really care about. And for me, that was the case. And so in 2015, we had the first tragedy where my father-in-law died of an accidental overdose. We're here in Northeast Ohio, in the Rust Belt, and in the heart of what at the time we didn't know was the burgeoning opioid epidemic. And we have always been, whether we choose to recognize it or not, at the center of a lot of deaths of despair. He was not immune to that. And so he had struggled with addiction and depression his entire life. And way too young. I mean, he was barely 50 when he died. It was a shock to all of us. Even though he had struggled with those things most of his life, it was still a huge shock. And so we buried him. We worked through that as a family, trying to make sense of that. And then 2 years later, my oldest brother-in-law, Ricky, died of a heroin overdose in his early 30s. Ricky was an incredibly talented chef, still the most charismatic person I've ever met up close, and a devoted and loving father and a great brother and friend. But like all those who have dealt with addiction or have had friends who have dealt with addiction or family members, the addiction takes over. And even though he had done rehab many times and was actually on an upswing, you just never know when you're playing with fire, when you get burned. And unfortunately, he had that accidental overdose, and it was a body blow. For me, I was close with him, but it was a body blow for our family. And to some degree, you never get over that, something like that. And I was, as you said, at that time, I was at the helm, second in command of our city, and dealing with a lot of victims from the opioid crisis and other things. And it was really hard. But at the time, I'm like, look, I got to be there. I got to work. I got to make sure I'm strong. I did. I just sort of pushed it aside and kept on going. And then in 2019, right after Christmas, actually, my mother was rushed to the hospital and had emergency heart surgery, where we found out that she had terminal cancer. She had struggled with breast cancer and lung cancer since she had retired several years prior, but had beat it back, well, we had thought. And so at some point, one of those bouts had become metastatic and had made its way to her heart. And at that point, there's really nothing that can be done other than hospice. And so my dad had died when I was really young, as a young teenager. And so my mom and I always enjoyed a really close relationship as a result. I moved in with her for the last few months of her life and took care of her at home with the help of my wife and with long-term care help, so I could go to work and then come home at night to her. And I just slept on a little cot next to her bed, for the last 3 to 5 months of her life. And she passed in June of 2019, and It was the third of a succession of unexpected and traumatic losses that really took whatever ego was left out of me. I started having a lot of anger at work, a lot of anger at home. I started drinking heavily again, which I had struggled myself with addiction as a youngster when my dad died. Then COVID came. So as if the other things weren't enough, COVID, with 2 school-age children and a wife who is a floor nurse at one of our adult hospitals when the pandemic hit, was just too much to bear. We made it through somehow. I still have no real idea that we made it through intact as a couple, as a family, all of those things. But I knew by the start of 2021 that I was a broken person. I everything that I thought I had built was a house of cards in terms of my own life and how I looked at it. The only thing that was really true was the love of my family and the love of these wonderful people who I had lost. And you start to reflect, like we all do, through the stages of grief. And through that process, I got myself into grief counseling through the help of a wonderful friend who recognized I was hurting. And it was in that process that I realized I can't do this without a spiritual life. I need that dimension in order to deal with this. I'm getting older. More bad things are bound to happen.
Yes.
And if I continue to respond to them the way that I did to these things, I'm going to be sorry I did that. That I didn't build a stronger sense of spirituality and of egolessness, if we can call it that I think is necessary when adversity hits. And so I started reading, as I said, everything I possibly could. And it was wild. About after 2 or 3 years of that, I was this time, like winter time, December a few years ago, I just said to my wife, what would you think if I went back to school for chaplaincy? Half expecting her to be like, that is nuts. Like, why would you do that? And then it would be done, right? I'd be like, yeah, you're right. And then just move on. And she was like, actually, I think that makes a lot of sense. And that validation, unexpected and wonderful, was enough to get me to go.
That is so beautiful listening to you for so many different reasons. First of all, one of the things that's been a big topic for me working with people in the last few weeks has been humility. What does it mean to recognize that we don't generate our own life, that we've been given this gift of life by a source and that we're utterly dependent on that source? So whatever that means for anybody in terms of spirituality, that humility is a reckoning. And, when we're talking about ego, I have a friend that's high up at Johnson & Johnson. She talks about ego maturity, where the ego matures into humility.
Yeah.
Right? And
I
so,
love that.
yeah. And so for me, listening to you, it was you choosing the relationship out of recognition of your own need. I think everything is need-based for us, that you aren't going to be sustainable in any kind of vibrant and holy and healthy way without that spirituality. And within that then there was a calling. Like whatever restoration is coming for you, that you see a way to help bring restoration into the world. That's my sense listening to you. And it's very touching to me. Just sitting with you here today, I feel very touched. And I'm sure our listeners are very touched. Listening to you and your courage and your recognition and choosing. I think that we all have the power to choose. And so as you are growing in yourself, and how do you imagine your ministry in the world?
This is still a big topic of discernment for me, but I know a few things. First, I feel called to stand with the marginalized, with the oppressed, with those that are hurting, that have been hurt, that are experiencing any and all forms of violence. How I do that, I think, is still an open question for me, how I can best use whatever talents and gifts that I have, how to bring that. So I'm studying the skills of chaplaincy, which a lot of times is seen one-on-one or in small groups, and a ministry of presence. At least that's how I like to think about it and how it's been explained to me in the best way. It's not about converting anyone. It's not about proselytizing to anyone about my faith or my own personal beliefs. It's about witnessing or acting as a wildly positive, radically loving, inclusive witness to whatever that other person or that community is facing. I know that I'll be in that vein doing something. There are some specific things that I think about a lot around the systems and policies that we have in our communities and in our country that perpetuate marginalization and oppression and harm. And coming from government and politics, I think a lot about that because it's just the other way I was trained. And I think a lot around how I could be helpful in imagining new systems and new things that would be designed to include everybody from the beginning.
I love that.
But there's also a big part of this which goes back to the ego conversation of surrendering. Like I'm somebody who always had a 5-year plan. I always had a 5-year plan. I constructed things in a way largely out of control. I wouldn't call myself a controlling person, but I think all of us, and Richard Rohr talks about this, it's actually not unhealthy for us in our adolescent years and in our early adulthood. We build the container that tells us what we think we are. We are, for James, it was, I'm a political person who, has a lot of degrees and is all about liberal causes, and justice. And so you create that container and then you live. And as we said, things happen bad and good. And if the container doesn't get destroyed, we don't grow. And so part of me being a little, I don't know, to your question is wanting to create the space for surrender, that I have an idea, but I also want to remain open to what the universe puts in front of me and what connections are made, like you and I meeting and stuff. Yes. So like I want to have a heading, but I don't necessarily want a map of the world, if that makes sense.
Oh, I love that. It's what we're calling forth in the Great Reconnection when we call soul-led leadership.
Yeah.
Is to be patient enough. And someone said recently on one of our calls, can I do well in waiting to be led and not pushing the river for a construct that may not be serving what I'm aiming to serve? So I appreciate you saying that. I want to talk about, I love listening to you talk. I feel like I could sit here for hours listening to you talk about, as a man, how are you looking at masculinity in this world? And what is, for me, when I've talked to you, part of what your ministry sounds like is inviting men into a different way of being. And can you talk about that a little bit?
As I shared, I lost my dad really young before I had a chance. I never knew my father as an adult. I created a caricature in my mind as a result, which I came to find out later is very typical for those that either lose parents young or never know their parents, of this wonderfully virtuous, and he was a great guy. But it is an amalgamation of things and narratives that I sort of made up in order to fill that gap. And so really, I never had a chance to talk to him about how he actually viewed manhood and how masculinity was formed for him and how he saw it over the course of his life. And so what happens? Well, the dominant narratives sneak in there. So I really convinced myself that my job as a man is to be the provider and to be taking charge. And whether I would have vocalized it that way or not, I think would have depended on the year you met me. But during those last, those intermediary 20 years or so, everything I did was about pursuing a career. Success equaled dollars and cents and title. I don't know that that's just a masculine thing, but it's definitely pervasive amongst men in the U.S. around.
Yes, definitely.
Your value is monetary, and it is about how much power you have at work. And even though at home, I mean, you'd have to interview my wife, but we've never had that kind of a relationship outwardly in the world. That's how I set up my container. And part of this spiritual journey for me is in recognizing not only is that not biblical, I'll argue all day long with folks that would claim otherwise. But even if the Bible isn't your thing, that's not spiritually healthy. And so we've missed, I was never taught all of the amazing matriarchal societies that we've had throughout human history. Within spirituality, even my own folks, folks watching the video will see like the red beard. Most of my people came from the Celtic lands. Well, pre-Christian Ireland and Scotland and things like that were very matriarchal. And the Druidic religion, the pre-Christian spiritual traditions were very much co-equal. Females could be priests, males could be priests. Like it mattered what your spiritual talents were. We don't get taught that. Not in the West anyway, not in the US, at least I wasn't. And so for me, as I've gone through this journey and trying to think about my ministry, I think about my 14-year-old son, and I think about the politics that we're experiencing right now that is just infused with, for lack of a better term, toxic versions of masculinity that are focused on dominance.
Predators.
Yeah. Real, like, it's my almost divine right to rule over every aspect of life. The subjugation of not only women, but of anything that considers feminine. We see what's happening in the trans community and others. Right. And it's like, there's a lot of that for me that's tied into that narrative. And the awful thing that I'm noticing is that two things. One, with the advent of social media, our young men, without even asking for it, the algorithm sends this stuff to them. There's so much of it now on the internet and through social media and through really easy forms of communication for young men to think this is how to be a man. This is what I'm supposed to ultimately grow into. And the other thing is that it ignores the real reality that we do have a male loneliness epidemic. We have a loneliness epidemic, period, in the U.S., as the former Surgeon General has so eloquently talked about. But there really is something going on with men. As our society continues to evolve and transform, these archaic narratives that I grew up with and so many others of my generation and others did, that's not reality. It probably never was, but it definitely isn't now. If we don't offer spaces that are more positive, more open, more authentic for men to come into and work through those. I've only read about them, but I think about the native tribes and the amazing male initiation rites and things that they would do throughout their life. We have lost so much of that as a species and as a society. If we can bring back some of those safer spaces that curate a positive form of masculinity. And for me, that really means not dominant, but co-equal, co-part with the rest of creation. I think that we could do a lot of good around addressing the loneliness epidemic, but in a way that doesn't create false narratives and false hopes that hurt a lot of people. Most importantly, they hurt the men themselves that fall into these traps.
It sounds like one of the ways that cultural shift, political policy shift could happen is through reframing the male narrative.
Yeah.
Because how many people are in senior leadership? And I'm wondering what it would be like if they got to have shifts in a way, because as above, so below, right?
Yeah.
So I've worked in organizations, whether it was to address racial equity when the CEO didn't really want it, but the staff did. You get sandwiched. You can't really have it, right? And so what if the senior leaders could have access to a different way of being that could create policies and cultures in the way that you're talking, where inclusion happens from the beginning? I know you're going to be starting your podcast. What is your podcast about?
Spoiler alert, I really do want to create a podcast around a faith-based or spiritual-based response to male loneliness and male purpose.
Great.
And so I'm working on that now. I'm hoping the goal is to have it up and running in the early part of 2026 and see where it goes.
I think that's great, because I started mine May 29th, and we're seeing where this one goes to. It's already in 31 countries. And thank you all for listening. I really appreciate it so incredibly much. I like to ask all the people that I'm interviewing, what does the purpose for life mean to you?
Purpose for life for me is in serving others, not in forgetting ourselves. But as you said, we all are given this drop of divinity, and we all go back to that same source.
Yeah.
And so how can I recognize or help you to recognize your own source, but then also value it, cherish it by doing whatever I can to be helpful?
I love that. Thank you. Listeners, thank you so much for being with us today. James, it's been absolutely amazing having you here. I know our listeners are going to take so much away from today. How can people get a hold of you?
So you can find me on LinkedIn. That's my biggest platform that I use. And I'm also a senior program officer at the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. So you can always go to rwjf.org and check out my bio and get my information there.
Great. Thank you so much. Once again, listeners, thank you for being with us today. Thank you, James, again. Once again, this is the Purpose for Life podcast. I'm Suzanne Roberts, your host, author of It's Deeper Than That, and founder of the Great Reconnection for soul-led living and soul-led leadership. And feel free to subscribe and keep listening. We love having you with us. Thank you.